Well, greetings everyone. It's just about 11 a.m. on the East Coast in Atlanta, Georgia, and welcome everyone to another one in our webinar series that we started in April 2020. It's hard to believe, but this is our third year of this continuous series on international business. Initially, we started discussing online teaching, online learning, as universities around the world quickly adopted to the new technology and reached out to our students through Zoom and other platforms. And then we added other topics to our webinars beyond pedagogy and education. We've held discussions, conversations with business leaders. We talked about also current business topics, trade issues, and so on. But this one is special. It's the first one in the new year here, 2022, and I'm very excited about the topic and the distinguished speakers that we have here with us. Let me just say that this webinar series is brought to you by Georgia State Cyber and 9 other centers federally designated as centers of excellence in international business, education, and research. Cybers have been around for some time, and we dedicate these series to educators and business people all around the world. As I mentioned, we ran some 60 plus webinars since 2020, and these webinars are recorded, and you'll be able to share them with your friends and colleagues in your network later on. And when you do exit the webinar, at the end of the webinar, there will be a short survey, just 5 short questions. Please stay on and respond to those questions. Everyone except the panelists is muted in the webinar. Please use the Q&A button for some comments and questions. We very much look forward to receiving your reactions. We will leave some time at the end of our webinar today for some discussion. And if you need any assistance, please use the chat room for our staff to communicate with you. If there are, typically, we do not use slides or other types of material, but if there are some resources that our speakers share with us, we send them to all participants after the webinar. And today's webinar is about 60 minutes. Our distinguished panelists have agreed to that time period. We may go over a little bit to the extent that we have some comments and questions and availability of our speakers as well. I said that I'm very excited about this topic today, which Janelle, you and others coined as from product to platform and transformation in global automotive industry. And I'm very excited because here we are again discussing advances in technology and how it is impacting one particular industry, very important industry, automotive industry. And you coined it also technology transforming vehicles into living rooms on wheels. I like that description. So we'll be able to listen and learn from our panelists here in terms of what kinds of technologies we're talking about, what kind of innovation is changing the global automotive industry, what kind of products are we talking about, what is the customer receptivity, what are the regional variations that we may be seeing to these new advances featured in the contemporary vehicles around the world. So let me just stop there and then introduce our distinguished moderators, Dr. Janelle Townsend from Oakland University, and I will ask Janelle to introduce our speakers in turn. Janelle, you started actually in industry before your academic career. You had a very distinguished industry experience, and you continued your interactions, collaboration with industry throughout your academic career as well, through consulting, advising, research, expert witness duties, and so on. Janelle, of course, is an academic leader. She's got a whole series of scholarly publications published in top journals. She's received many teaching and research awards, serves on many editorial boards of journals in business and international business. Janelle, of course, you have your PhD from Michigan State University, and you're also, in addition to your duties, chairing the management and marketing department at Auckland University. You're affiliated with the TUVN in Austria and the University of Zurich in Switzerland. With that, welcome, Janelle, and welcome all of our distinguished panelists, Amit, Anya, and Vitali. And Janelle, if I can ask you to briefly introduce our distinguished speakers, and we'll get going with our conversation today.
Great, thank you, Professor Travis Gillat. Truly appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation today about some of the exciting things that are happening in the automotive industry. Just to give some of our listeners a little background, Oakland University is on the Dodge Wilson estate, which is Dodge Cars, which is now part of Stellantis, which is about, the US headquarters is about half a kilometer from our university. And we're about 15 minutes from where General Motors has just announced several $1 billion investment in electric trucks. So to give, frame where we're coming from and why automotive is so important to me personally and to this region and really to the world. The automotive industry is one of the most global industries that people don't oftentimes recognize how global they are, and our product development has been based historically on this concept of platform in the product itself, in the hard product. And in the current era of digitalization that we've moved into, things are becoming platforms for other products to be part of the auto space. And so we're really seeing this transformation in a way that we haven't in some time. So I think it's really important for us to understand that 70% of the innovation in the automotive industry is coming from the supply base. And that's where our guests today are so important to understand what's happening in the supply base. I'll just share a quick slide here. To give an overview of the folks we're speaking with today. So first, we have Amit Kapoor, who is a vice president at Continental. Continental is the 5th largest automotive supplier in the world. They have $30 billion a year in sales and are really leading the digital transformation in a number of different component areas. And Amit is a leader in helping to build the innovation space that they're working in. So we're really thrilled to have Amit here with us today. Thank you for joining us. We also have Professor Anya Schulze, who is the leading expert in Switzerland in the automotive industry. Surprisingly, there are 450 Swiss automotive suppliers, which is something, or actually more than that, I think now, which is a little bit surprising to me when I first learned that. And Anya is most definitely one of the thought leaders in the digitalization and innovation space in the automotive industry, and foremost in Switzerland for sure. So thank you, Anya. Appreciate you being here with us today. And then finally, we have Vitaly Ponomarev, and he is the CEO and founder of a company called Wayray, which is a truly innovative company that is helping to build this virtual space in vehicles. He has support and investment from Alibaba in China, and BMW out of Germany. He's based in Switzerland right now, but has offices in several countries around the world. We're moving into this metaverse space. He already has $100 million in startup funding and is being looked at as probably one of the next big unicorn companies. So we're thrilled to have Vitaly come and join us too for this conversation. So with that in mind, I will stop sharing because as Professor Travis Gillat said, the intent is for this to be more conversational. So rather than sharing slides the whole time, I'll just go ahead and ask Anya to go ahead and maybe give a little bit of an overview of what she sees as happening in the digitalization and innovation of the automotive industry right now.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm really happy to be here and would like to start off with, this kind of overview. There's so many things happening in the mobility and automotive industry that sometimes it's really hard to make sense of all of these developments. And something that can help to make sense are 4 letters, namely the 4 letters of CASE, C-A-S-E, and C is for connectedness. Cars being connected to other cars, to other devices, to infrastructure, things like that. A for autonomous driving. S for shared mobility, or maybe even for subscription too. And E is for the drivetrain, the electric, maybe other drivetrain alternatives, but the case just makes a good word here so we can remember that. Now, this webinar here is about the first letter, the connectedness. And there's 2 specific things that appear here that drive this connectedness in the auto industry and elsewhere too. The first is that we have increasingly cyber physical products or components, and you can think of a car as a cyber physical product. And what characterizes a cyber physical product is that it is material, it has physical components. It also has so-called smart components, that is sensors, software, processors. And it has connectivity components, and that is it can transfer data, receive data, and also send data and store data too. And an example application here, how that helps the consumer to have a better experience and driving experience, is an app that's developed by Bosch, and it's called community-based parking. That is, if you drive your car through the city, the sensors will recognize where there are free parking spaces on the side of the road, and that will be connected into the cloud and will be transferred to others searching for a parking space. That is, the whole community feeds through the sensors of their cars into this app and then helps others to find a parking space. Now, what is specific about these cyber physical products is that they're basically not readily developed upon delivery. That is, through over-the-air updates, your product, your car, is being improved repeatedly. And I think driving assistance is just one example. That is like a technical development that we have here, but that feeds back into how we run our business or how companies run their business. And that is that new product development now is not ready with developing things, but keeps continuously developing things. Plus, there's a different time frame for the material parts and for the immaterial parts. That is, the material parts are supposed to last very long. The immaterial parts will be dynamically updated all the time. And what does that mean also for product design? That is, for example, that we try to get rid of buttons, the physical parts, and move them towards into the non-physical space. I drive a Volvo, and the previous version of that Volvo had a number of buttons, like for changing the radio station or adjusting the heat and things like that. Now it's all like a display, like an iPad is, right? By that, you can make your product adjustable over time, or longer time period. Also, what happens is that these cars are equipped with so-called silent components, silent sensors, for example. And that is, Tesla had a version with a camera looking inward, like into the cabin. And that was silent, not used at the beginning when they delivered that product. Later, they developed a software that would recognize occupants in the car and then adjust, the radio station and the seats and whatnot, depending who was in the car. But that was done later. Now, that is a little bit problematic if you're used as a company of selling a product, getting a price for it, and then you're done with that. Now you have your developers being engaged all the time continuously. That means you probably have to change your business model towards subscription, or have to find other means of how to capture value. So creating value and also capturing value changes with the products becoming cyber physical. And a second avenue, a second area of this increasing connectedness that we see happens through platforms. And platforms connect and link people, organizations, things, the Internet of Things, you've heard about those. And before I dig a little bit deeper into digital platforms, just let me say there is a ton of different meanings for platforms. A lot of times we have somebody speak about platforms and they mean something different than we think we mean with this. So having said that, I want to speak about two different types of platforms. The first type is like a business platform, like a marketplace. And in the auto industry, Uber would be an example, where you basically match supply and demand. And the other type of platform are tech platforms, platforms upon something is built, developed, like a foundation also for, and then can be a foundation also for innovation. And the iOS system would be an example for such a platform. And again, these technical developments have implications for how the business is run. As a platform leader, and then Apple and the App Store, for example, would be an example here. You can capture a large part of value, even though others develop these apps and these things. That is, you don't own the resources that bring about these products. And also the innovation is done largely independent by others. We've heard about the supply chains before, and the suppliers doing a lot of innovation. Yes, but there's also a lot of control by the OEMs. On those platforms, that innovation happens quite independently. Now, there is these network effects coming with these platforms. We see a lot of monopolistic, oligopolistic structures there, almost like the winner takes it all due to these network effects. That brings a lot of power with it, which, yes, is beneficial from a competitive advantage point of view, but also a lot of liability, if you will, because as a platform leader, you have to set all of the rules, how people can behave on those platforms to ensure the quality in all of this. And just to bring an example here, Facebook has probably more than 1.5 billion users now. And it's a private company that sets the rules. It's no democratic process that does that, right? So these are changes. It's not so much anymore about managing the supply chain. It's more about governing these platforms. And with this, I would like to come back to this general picture of case. We're on the letter C, the connectedness, and the cyber-physical products and the platforms are the two parts I talked about. And now I'm looking forward to hear more from our industry representatives who are both active in these two areas. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anya. That's a wonderful overview and explanation of where we are right now and setting the stage. So thank you so much. I'd like to ask Amit, maybe if you could share with us a little bit of what's happening with Continental in this space, and and just in general with the automotive industry.
Yeah, sure. Anya, I took some notes. You used some really interesting words that I had not heard before, so thank you for that. You hit a couple of things that I fully agree with. Yes, we are innovating, and for us, platforms have you put it very well. In the past, platforms were in the product, and now platforms are part of products are part of the platform, and it's basically a conglomeration of various products that can be used to achieve certain functions or purposes in the car. I have been for my whole career part of the autonomous mobility and safety group in our company. I have worked in ADAS for a few years, and now I'm in vehicle dynamics. I lead the vehicle dynamics team in safety and motion. So we operate from a very safety-oriented view of these platforms. And there you're absolutely right. Especially even in ADAS, you gave the example of Tesla. We are working on customer requirements of how they want to introduce technologies or functions or features out in the future. So we design our products, whether it's sensors, whether it's control units or actuators, to get ready for what they want to do in the future. But what has really changed is the architectures in the vehicle. So we need more bandwidth, we need more speed, and we are going farther and farther away from the CAN-based architectures as we go into very ECU-driven corner architectures to domain and finally to cross-domain big controllers. And for this, of course, we need connectivity to do OTA, but also what we have to look out for is cybersecurity with the UNECE coming in and vulnerability management becoming a big topic of discussion. You have to isolate our safety domains away from a lot of these topics. What we see is data is becoming king, and here we are tied to requirements that our OEMs set for us, and depending on various contracts. So we have OEMs in different spaces. We also do fleet services out of Continental. We also do non-automotive markets, rideshare and let's say special mobility group markets. So depending on contractual agreements, we have to be careful on who owns the data. And depending on who owns the data, they are the ones who have access to the function or feature that we develop for them and go into our product. So you mentioned cloud, and you mentioned this parking feature. So there we have some agreements like this as well. But there you need to be very clear contractually who owns access, how access is achieved, even for aftermarket, because in the end, those modules are secure. So I hope that brought a little bit more the industry view.
Absolutely. That's it's really very interesting, and to understand where all these pieces fit together and what these systems are that we need to put in place. And I would think this really, what you spoke to, really helps also give us some insight perhaps into the foundations of what Vitalis is now doing is with his work in the developing the metaverse on wheels, if you will, because you guys are the foundation for that, right? So Vitalis, could you share with us a little bit about what does this mean, metaverse on wheels?
Yeah, thanks. So basically, it's also sort of platform that we're developing for the automotive. And when Continental is one of the top tier leaders as a tier one for the automotive building components, we try to do deep tech, which is sometimes a bit different from what tier one do. Usually deep tech companies in automotive are tier 2 and below, but we are very ambitious and we want to go against the stream. Usually in automotive, you know, if you look at the car, you don't see any other brand usually than the car's brand. So you don't know who are the suppliers. You don't know. There are only two examples that I found. One is the tires, you know, if it is Continental or Michelin, or the sound system. So sometimes premium sound systems are being sold under, I don't know, Harman, Bang & Olufsen brands. That helps car makers to sell their cars better, or their options better. But usually OEMs, the car makers, they have a tendency of not showing who is actually behind this technology, who are behind these innovations they introduce as theirs. OEMs currently are just aggregators as of what has been designed by other hundreds of suppliers. And Weiray is somewhere at tier 2 level. And maybe it makes sense for me to show what exactly we do, but just to explain to listeners how this works in general. So we're at a tier 2 level where we are a technology provider, and we work with car makers directly, introducing our technology, and then we invite tier 1s like Continental to physically manufacture that. So they can take the responsibility as a big company, take the responsibility of building this in time and in sequence, meaning that everything is in line with the manufacturing timelines of the car maker itself. So, and when I said that we are ambitious, I will just now explain what does it mean. So we want not to be just a silent supplier that nobody knows about. We actually want to get to the end user being recognized, and that's because of our culture and the great technology that nobody has in the market. So we are #1 in the world in holography, and I wanted just to show you just a few slides. I know that you didn't want me to share anything, but I just want to show what, because it's very visual what we do. We do the holographic head-up displays. It's the next generation of head-up displays that allow to see very wide angle field of view and depth. So you can place lots of content for the driver and passengers, and for side windows and passengers. So it's not only the driver-related information, but lots of other information. We're #1 in the world for this. So we're #1 in the world in holography, which is a part of optics and physics. It's an avant-garde of optics, and we have developed new lasers, new materials. We actually are very, very deep tech company. So we have a lot of knowledge in different aspects of chemistry, optics and holography, etc. So the first product that we designed is a deep reality display that allows to see the content in depth, and it's the best in the industry in terms of package size, in terms of performance, and many other parameters. And this is our first business pillar. So how we work is we are silent suppliers to automotive. Big guys, we are 250 people in the company. OEMs have dozens of thousands, and they treat us not very politely as all suppliers. That is the rule of the game. So, but we, like us being monopolists in this particular field, allows us to actually to be a bit more arrogant and to try to build up a platform. This is exactly what Anya was telling. And actually there are two sorts of platforms, and we try to build both. So the first platform that we're building is around the content. So we're controlling the whole chain of technology from the display point of view to the rendering point of view, meaning that we can make this display that is state of the art, and nobody can make it because it's really complex. And then we can do also the software that renders all this nice content around the car. And here comes the actual platform, the software platform that we're now building. And this is a software platform for the content that is floating around the car. And this is kind of like a marketplace, like an app store in case of Apple. So we want to be the first content platform for all cars globally. And that is very ambitious because many car makers have a willingness to build up their own platforms. But we think that it is barely possible that developers like Facebook and Google, the ones who own the content and the knowledge about passengers and merchants, that they will be willing to develop particular cars, a particular application for particular OEMs. So this war, I think that they lost. I mean, the OEMs, they lost this war, and there are big tech companies like Apple and Google who are introducing their platforms, like our Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and we want to do it even at another level. So we want to make a platform for AR content, and that is the second platform. The second business line, the pillar of our business that we're working on. And then we thought, hey, maybe we should do something even more aggressive. And then we have introduced our own car, which is the first, as we said, Metaverse on wheels concept, where we thought that we'll create the car for the ride hailing, like for Uber, Didi, and Lyfts, where passengers can actually sit in the car and enjoy the gaming experience or other types of infotainment experience, where the whole interior of the car was specifically designed according to all the homologation rules, specifically designed to provide this best AR immersive experience, and nobody does this in the market. So that's a demo car. Of course, we don't have any ambition at the moment to become a car maker, because it's like we're at a completely different stage and completely different side of the board. But that might become a platform for developers to develop their applications for new type of transportation, because today's Zoomers, young generation, they don't actually care about the brands of cars that they're sitting in while riding in ride-hailing car. So we think that car brands will be eliminated soon, and big OEMs, or sorry, big tech companies will take over the content part, and then simply current big car brands will be transformed into silent white label hardware manufacturers, because what they manufacture today, be that whatever, autonomous, electric, name it, it is still commodity, because there's so many capacity now out there in the market for manufacturing cars. And but I think that the monetization of the time people spend in the cars will come from the content. So this is what we do. This is a metaverse on wheels, and yeah, we're number one in this.
Wow, that's a lot. And you know, having read a little bit about Vitalis' background, this all started from, was it a car accident on the ring road in Moscow, right? So
yeah, yeah, that's true. I was distracted by GPS navigation. I thought that we should do AR GPS, and then yeah, we didn't know, by the way, that Conti, Continental, Bosch, and many other tier ones have been trying to do this for many years. And Continental, actually, Continental was the first tier one to manufacture in large scale head-up displays for BMW. So they were the first ones. But we're doing like a next generation, another type of head-up displays.
Interesting. So you guys are a little bit of competitive space here.
Well, it's an automotive. Actually, there is a competition, but it's it does look like oligopoly than actual competition, because the market is, in terms of people who are making decisions, is limited, both on the side of OEMs and tier ones. So yes, there is a competition, but the market size is that big. I mean, in terms of volumes and cars being sold, and the entry barrier is that high, that, I mean, if you are there, you will have the market, you will have ability to kind of compete with others. So we don't consider Continental as our competitor. We work with them. Actually, we're discussing now several ideas together. So I don't think that we're competing. I mean, there's always room for different programs, and there are many OEMs and programs out there.
Janelle, if I can interject a question here for our distinguished speakers. What comes to mind is all these innovations. Yes, they are a result of technology advances, but at what point and how do you bring in the customer input, reactions, receptivity? I mean, how does the customer needs and desires, wishes meet the technological advances? I mean, how does that interface happen? Maybe our speakers can comment on that.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting presentation. That's pretty amazing what you showed, and I agree. I think the next generation of our consumers are looking at cars a little bit differently, but I think there's always a convergence of technological advances and technological development and know-how to regulation and what actually the car is intended, for. It's for safe transportation, and I think that is what eventually happens. What Vitaly is showing is a consumer-based technology development, and like I said, when you actually put all this in a car. Even now, that is a challenge for ADAS, but also for displays and mapping. You are faced then with the restrictions of safety, distracted driving, all these different aspects of different mobility concepts on the road at the same time that have to be protected and taken care of. So my belief is that I have seen many, many developments happening, and this is really amazing what you showed, Vitaly. This will need a lot of processing power in the car. This will need a lot of prioritization of bandwidth in the car when the right decisions need to be made. But what he's presenting is absolutely a consumer drive towards, I want to simplify it and say, digitalization of everything. And you can easily, I can see combinations of this happening with even joysticks and driven control. But in the end, like I said before, the actuation and sensing needs to happen somewhere to create all this data. And the speed with which that is created and how fast it can be fed and used for actuation becomes really important and critical at some point.
Thank you, Amit. Yeah, so I can comment on this a bit. So we are responsible for a whole stack of sensoring and situational awareness. So this concept already works, and it's not for drivers but for passengers. So here we don't have any regulation limitation. And answering what Tamir just asked about the where the requirements from the end user meet the technology. So we have so in our development cycle of Wayray, we have a research which does everything they want. They are like in a sandbox, and they have no limitations. They just create and create and create. And we have in our company two types of people. We call them, one type is creators, and second is enablers. So creators, they create whatever they like, and it's like a sandbox. And out of that they spit out new ideas ready for platformization. And then the role of the platform in our company is to match the customer needs with what technology is capable of. And they are also bringing to the research the feedback of what will be needed in the future, in the next generation of the product. So they would focus their efforts on specific topics. So then the platform, what they do, they take the feedback not only from the customer, meaning the car maker, because car makers, they have their own vision, view. Sometimes we completely disagree with what they ask us to do for, because sometimes it doesn't make any sense. It's their perception or vision of how it should look like, and we're fine with that. But on the other hand, we have our own research, or our own user experience research, what the end user would like to have. And many times we come to the customer, meaning to our customer, to the OEM, and say, hey, this is what you think people want to have, and this is what we have asked people, and what we have created. And sometimes there are crazy interfaces that we're developing. Like just recently, we have created for Tesla, we have created an 8-bit interface like in Super Mario game. And no classical OEM like Mercedes or BMW would ever think of introducing that type of interface, because it's like too childish. But Tesla users do really like it, and they really want to see something really different. And we have already asked them. We already made this test, and then we kind of combine this into a platform, and then we come to the OEM and say, this is the product that we think makes sense for you from commercial point of view, from the point of view of selling the car to the end user and to the end users. So this is how it works in Wayray.
Yeah, and actually that answers a question that one of our participants, Ronaldo Parente, has asked, the interface between the OEMs and deep technology supplier companies, companies like yours, Vitaly. What I'm hearing, there is a lot of back and forth interaction between the two. And what Amit is emphasizing is really growing complexity of technology embedded in the final product is one kind of stopping factor. And the other major issue is safety, especially drivers, from the driver's perspective. But I know, Vitaly, you also talked about, others in the car, other riders in the car too. Yeah, it's a fine balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
I really find it interesting, your background on what was said about your accident. I think that is a really interesting background coming from. And I don't think it's a blocking. I think there can be, just like Vitalis said, it needs some out-of-box thinking. And of course, the traditional OEMs will see the path. And we have seen this happen in other spaces, you know, where they were fast followers on a technology. You can take electrification, you can take other topics. And what I really like what you showed, Vitaly, not just for the consumers, but even when you go towards completely autonomous driving, I could even see some uses to come up with a USB for the driver. So I would not consider it a blocking. It is definitely complexity, and it is definitely something that has to be, this boundary that has to be crossed.
Thanks, Smith.
Yeah.
So there was a question. Sorry, I just wanted to comment. There was a question from anonymous attendee that they were asking if the car will will lead to many crashes because people will be playing on the road. So I just commented that this is the taxi car, so the actual driver can be either in the car or drive it remotely, and these gaming features are only allowed for passengers, not for drivers. Sorry.
Oh no, that's great, because that is very important, right? I mean, this is the idea of distracted driving, and as Amit mentioned, is maybe as autonomous becomes more of a reality, and that's a different level of the case framework that Anya shared with us at the beginning of, you know, perhaps as we move along here, that drivers will be able to engage in some other things, but certainly not at the moment in the technology we have now. Something that I thought of while you were both of you were talking was this idea of a walled garden, right? And with the data, as we're talking about the, you know, data security and data ownership, and Vitaly, you mentioned, you know, Google and Apple in particular. You know, Facebook has been brought up here as well. You know, these are companies that are really moving towards these walled gardens, and I'm curious of how do you see this working in the automotive space? Especially moving forward, you know, there may be different perspectives from the big suppliers, from Amit, and from you know, the upstart, if you will.
So I can answer that. That's another interesting phrase today, the walled garden. So as I said before, we have had cases where we are given a space that we have to operate in, and the interior camera was a very good example that came up earlier, which was a silent product. I think Anya, you brought it up. It was a silent product which was activated at a later date. We are recently working for, or we were working with another new car maker that had similar. They asked us to retrofit the car with product that they were not using. They wanted to use it when it went to level 3+ autonomy. So we had all the sensing capability and the processing capability lie dormant, and they were going to use it and turn it on at a later date. After the homologation was done, vehicle approval was gained, road approval. And the walled garden was this space. We had this space, we knew how to get to this space, but we did not have the key to the garden. The key to the garden was through the OEM. So we had a very good description of when they would open this, but the connection to the vehicle was through the OEM. And in most cases, that is the case. And like I said, that has to be the case for especially, I always, Conti follows the Sense Plan Act architecture. You know, for anything, if you consider the car as a human body, it has to sense its surrounding, it has to sense itself, what is going on, then it plans accordingly, and then it acts. Anything that touches actuation in a vehicle, whether it's steering, whether it's braking, you don't want that access by somebody else. You can imagine I have put some of the colleagues in cars where I put it in brake fallback mode, and it's a feeling you don't want to encounter. And that is the walled garden. So even within a walled vehicle architecture, you have other components of sub-architectures that are even walled further. And that access for us is only through OEM. Now you can draw contracts and say we can introduce certain aspects. Parking was one example because we use the same cameras and things. But for that, you also need to go through the OEM.
I also can add that maybe some unpopular thought, that the problem of data protection is a bit overrated in my opinion when it comes to cars, because we all sit in cars with smartphones and we have so much data stolen about us through these things. I mean, you've been experiencing this many times when you open Instagram and suddenly you get an ad of something you were talking about, and this was heard through the mic. So it is already it's already been widely used in smartphones. I think that I agree that it's when it comes to like safety in cars, because the car is in motion, and if someone hacks in, that is safety critical, of course. But regarding the data that is about like our behaviors, what we like to buy, whatever, I don't think that this is a big issue. And of course, OEMs today, they're really obsessed that they want to keep it, as Amit said, they want to have like a bulletproof walls. It was recently a big drama that OEM didn't want to have CarPlay, and big OEMs like BMW and Mercedes, they gave up recently, but they didn't want to. They thought that this American tech companies, they want to take over everything we have. The data is a gold mine, but in the reality, it's not. They already are exploiting this through our smartphones. So I think that this is. And unfortunately, you cannot utilize this data as an OEM, as a car maker, the way that how Google and Apple can do this, because they really can create billions out of this data. And for an OEM who have a limited market size, there's no network effect again enough for making money out of it. So in my opinion, data is just data. It's like, we've heard of all these nice startups in China. They're popular in China. There were many startups who are providing bicycle sharing, like Ofo and many others. They're now dead cities in China with all these bikes, because they were selling the idea to their investors that they will be using the data of behavioral data of these users somehow, but nobody cared about this data in the end. So that's it.
So doesn't that lead to the idea of better integration then, perhaps, between these different, and it sounds to me like what you're actually intending to do is integrate more with perhaps the cell phones, or I guess I'm not really clear on that, of how does that work? Because you did mention, Google and Apple, who, have control of majority of the cell phone space, the mobile communication space. So how does that fit together?
Yeah. So in our case, we want them to use our platform with their platform. So they already have the knowledge about merchants and passengers and their behaviors. So they already have a big customer base on both ends. And we provide them another way of representation of the information. It's contextual. It's geographically contextual. And because of that, the CTR, the conversion into purchase, is significantly higher than if you just browse something on the internet through your smartphone, because there the distance to merchant and is significantly bigger, and that is why the conversion will be lower. So advertisers will be willing to pay more, because it could be like coffee shop around the corner or another shop with like immediate discounts, so you can just stop by and buy something. That is why for companies like Google, Meta, or Apple, it will be just another way how to monetize, how to make an extension from their existing smartphone applications that their developers create into augmented reality. But that is, as I said, is very ambitious to convince Google to develop application for Huawei platform. At the moment, it sounds a bit strange, and the only bridge to this is through the holographic technology that only Huawei owns at the moment. So this is the only opportunity for us to become that platform. Yeah, but we don't have any intention to develop any applications ourselves or social networks. No, that's not our intention.
Gotcha. I think I understand. So, Amit, I was wondering, do you think that perhaps some of this data that, you know, Vitalis said, well, it's really not that important because we have it already in the cell phones. But what came to mind for me was braking systems in particular, or, you know, some of these different safety systems that particular industries might have an interest in, like insurance companies, right? They'd like to know how fast you're braking and those types of things.
I mean, it's not just that. If you look at the peripheral sensing of a vehicle, there's a lot of data that the car, and there were recent court cases you can look up about this, where when this data is transmitted, it is involving participants around the car that have not necessarily agreed to that data being shared. And that crosses a certain boundary. So data can come in many forms. As long as the car is sensing itself, I think that data is more useful for the car to operate itself safely. But that data can be manipulated for a car to actuate different systems in a car. And you know, we have functional safety requirements for car, especially in braking. We are ASIL-D architectures, and that is basically identifying and making sure that there's redundancies built into the system. That if one sensing element fails, we have other sensing mechanisms. And if somebody gets a hold of this data, it's not about how the data is used to sell, it is about how the data could be used to manipulate something. That is the key example I can give you. And there are countries that do not allow peripheral sensing data to be transported out of their country for that reason. So there are very clear requirements of what data is generated. And this is something that I always find quite interesting to discuss. Data has different meaning for different people, you know, and it depends on whether it's data about your taste, you know, your personal data, whether it's data about your surrounding, or whether it's data about vehicle performance. So one example, good example I can give how we're using data is we have contracts with some of our customers where we're using over-the-air data back from the unit to see how the unit is behaving in the field. And we use this for quality monitoring, for different kinds of improvements. But this is, again, because of the complexity of the system, we have to do it through the OEM. And it is very specified to what data can come.
If I may ask Janelle a question that comes to my mind. In the relationship between the OEMs and these deep technology suppliers like Vitalis, the funding part, the financing part, I mean, how does that work? I mean, I'm not in the industry, so this may be a naive question, but technology costs money, and sometimes, you know, some large sums of investment. Is there a collaboration with respect to funding? I mean, do OEMs reach out and fund certain projects by smaller technology companies? How does that work? Amit, Vitaly, if you can comment on that.
Yeah, I can comment from my side. We are really not as established, as big as Conti, of course. Conti is a $30 billion business, we're not. And the most painful truth is that OEMs don't like to pay in advance. They usually pay after there's certain kind of milestones that you need to go through, and then after the nomination, after you get the contract or the nomination award, then they may pay so-called NRE payments, which we may cover fully or partially the development cost, but that's maybe from certain level to sample A or sample B, something that goes into the production already. And the research part, nobody wants to fund. That's your own business, do your investment. That's why it's really tough area for startups. So you cannot see many startups in the automotive world. You may have heard of recently, like there are some EV startups, meaning that the EV technology startups, LiDAR companies, that try to do something very fast and very differently. There's one I would say this is only one successful case of Mobileye, who did this sensing, ADAS sensing technology, and they actually mastered to become a good supplier, but from being nowhere and from coming from nowhere. And that's really tough business, actually. So you need to invest hundreds of millions of dollars into a potential, and there is no guarantee that you will get anything. You won't get any contract, because I mean, a bigger company, a bigger tier one has much more resources, and most importantly, relationships with this customer. And they may do something together. They know exactly the programs that have been launched by customers, and for them, it's easier to operate. So for startups, it's definitely not a very pleasant place to be. And yeah, it's time demanding, because imagine you are fundraising from VCs, and they expect you to be like very fast, show your growth rate, and your time to market is 7 years at least. So because the difference between the nomination time and start of production is like, it could be 3 to 5 years. So you will just wait for cash to flow in for 5 years, and that's not a classical VC investment model.
That helps a lot. Thank you so much, Vitaly. I can understand it now better. Janelle, we have about 5 minutes left in the allotted time. So if you want to wrap up with any comments, questions that you'd like to offer.
I just want to answer, if you let me just quickly. I fully agree with Vitaly.
That's what I was going to actually suggest, is that, because I could tell Amit was ready to jump in on that one.
So even for tier ones, it's not easy, but we do take a very collaborative approach with our OEMs, just because their cycles are very rigid, and we have to follow a lot of different, even by region, validation cycles. But the time to market is improving, Vitaly. I can also attest to that.
Yes, because someone on in Texas and California now shows that it can be improved significantly.
No comment.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. We are coming to the close of our originally scheduled time, and there are some other questions that have come in, and some other things that we could discuss here, especially related to global markets. So if our panelists have time to stick around for a few more minutes, just to maybe answer any of the things that come up, that would be wonderful. But for our scheduled time, just want to make sure that we finish up for those folks who maybe can't continue on. So thank you so much to Vitaly Ponomarev, and the founder and CEO of Wayray, and Amit Kapoor, our vice president from Continental, and our senior vice president, I should say, and Anya Schulze, who is the chair of technology and innovation management at the University of Zurich, as well as the executive director of Swisscar, which is a research consortium focused on the automotive supply base in Switzerland. So thank you so much for everyone who has joined us, and we can continue the conversation for a few more minutes from here out. Thank you.
If you are
thank you,
all
Professor
available.
Travis Gillat.
Yes, thank you, Janelle. That's been a great session. We're getting a lot of praise from the participants. Maybe one last question I would ask all three of our speakers. You talked about, Janelle, global markets. I mean, variations from country to country due to their regulations. And I mean, you gave a very tangible example of that. So when it comes to receptivity of new technologies blended into these vehicles, what adjustments do you need to make? And your customer, the assembler, I mean, I'm thinking about you, I mean, as an OEM, your assembler, your customer, works in multiple geographies, multiple continents. So what is the degree of flexibility, adaptation that you need to provide for them?
It's becoming more and more standardized, but the two things I can speak is there's a big difference between time to market, depending on which market you look at. There we see also differences. The need, I always tell my engineers, you have to look at the end cost of a car. The average cost of a car, if you look at the average global cost of a car, it's a certain number. And only so much cost can be absorbed by the end consumer who's buying this car. So depending on the purchasing power of different countries and different regions, you see different technologies taking hold. And one of the examples I can give is just like Vitaly said, user graphics is big in the Asian region. I mean, they're big on displays and how it is and how they use. And certain others are big in Europe. So it's different for different markets, but what we do see is there's a general push towards time to market improvements all across the world, and also standardization of safety. So there's a big push for newer countries to catch up to where the West has been, and that is leading very fast. The platforms are global now. So there used to be a time where platforms were very different, even at the car platform level. So I think this will be the silent mode that Anya was talking about, where the vehicles will be retrofitted or be ready to be deployed with aftermarket products. That is my feeling. It is not something I have seen, but it could be.
Very interesting, very informative. Any final thoughts, Janelle, Anya, Vitaly, Amit, before we close the session?
Yeah, my take would also be that it moves towards standardization, and the difference may be in the speed of adoption, because some have maybe quicker and faster a specific taste for like the immersed things there, and then also affordability, as Amit just said, and also infrastructure. So I'm thinking of the data network that needs to be available in countries that are not as equipped. So yes, in general, standardization, but the speed of adoption will differ. And I think one important component that also was mentioned already is regulation that will limit or not limit or determine the speed too.
Remarkable, very, very helpful. Amit and Vitaly, any final comments?
Thank you for the opportunity. It was really good. Like I said, I picked up some good words, really interesting concepts, and please let us know if at least I can help anytime.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amit. Vitaly.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It was great to be here and to exchange with opinions. I hope that attendees who were here really enjoyed it. And yeah, I'm also available for everyone in the LinkedIn if you have any questions.
Well, thank you so much for your generous time, expertise. It's been very instructive, very educational for me. And as you can see, there's a lot of good praise from our participants and indications of interest for future sessions like this. Janelle, I know you spent a lot of time organizing this session. Thank you so much for your leadership in this as well. So we'll wrap up here, and we'll say goodbye to all of our participants. Before, I'd like to ask all of our participants, once you exit, you will get an email with a very brief questionnaire. Please respond to that. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Good to see you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.